capitalizing or exploiting my relationship with him. So that's why I never wrote a book for almost 40 years about my relationship with Elvis.
She had stayed quiet for nearly half a century. Through interviews, documentaries, and books, Linda Thompson had smiled politely, spoken softly, and always stopped just short of telling the whole story. But at 76, her tone changed. When she finally spoke, it wasn't bitter, it wasn't angry, it was weary. "I kept that secret because I loved him," she said. And for the first time, people realized the weight she'd been carrying all those years wasn't just grief. It was the burden of something Elvis Presley had made her promise never to reveal. It began long before the tabloids ever mentioned her name. Before she was Elvis's girlfriend, Linda was a beauty queen from Memphis, a girl with Southern grace, ambition, and a sense of faith that mirrored Elvis's own. They met in 1972, only a few months after his separation from Priscilla. The king of rock and roll was lonely, restless, and desperately looking for someone who could make him feel human again. When Linda walked into his life, something shifted. She wasn't starstruck. She wasn't after fame. She saw a man, not a monument. In the beginning, their connection was effortless. Elvis was tender, attentive, and surprisingly vulnerable with her. He'd call late at night just to talk, telling stories that wandered between childhood memories and deep spiritual questions. "I feel like God put you here," he once told her, and maybe she believed it, because she stayed. Through the endless tours, the late-night rehearsals, and the sudden mood swings that could turn laughter into silence without warning. But as the months turned into years, Linda began to realize something wasn't right behind the marble gates of Graceland. The mansion everyone dreamed of visiting felt less like a palace and more like a fortress. The curtains stayed closed. The clocks meant nothing. Elvis rarely slept, drifting between gospel music and bursts of paranoia that no one outside his circle ever saw. Fame had given him everything, but peace of mind was never part of the deal. And Linda, still in her 20s, found herself living with a man the world adored, but who no longer knew how to breathe outside the legend he'd built. She'd watch him pace through the house in the early hours, whispering half prayers under his breath, staring at old photographs as if he was trying to remember who he used to be. Sometimes he'd confide in her. He'd talk about feeling chosen, cursed, tested, about seeing signs, numbers, dreams, coincidences he couldn't ignore. At first, Linda thought it was exhaustion, maybe stress. But the more he spoke, the more she realized these weren't passing thoughts. They were beliefs he clung to. And the more the world demanded Elvis the icon, the more fragile Elvis the man became. Linda stayed loyal. She defended him when friends whispered about his habits, when reporters asked too many questions, when his behavior started to shift from eccentric to alarming. To the outside world, she was the calm presence by his side, the beautiful woman who kept the king grounded. But inside Graceland, she was becoming something else entirely. The keeper of truths too heavy for anyone else to carry. And then came the night he told her the one thing she could never repeat. She wouldn't write it down. She wouldn't even tell close friends decades later. But whatever he confessed changed her forever. She said it wasn't about drugs or women or money. It was about the part of Elvis no one truly knew, the part that scared him most. After that night, every time she looked at him on stage, smiling for thousands, she saw the secret behind his eyes, the one he made her protect with her silence. Linda's life became a balancing act between devotion and denial. She loved him deeply, but the deeper that love went, the more she saw how impossible it was to save him. Still, she stayed because she believed he needed her, not as a lover, but as a witness to the man he was when the lights went out. When she finally broke her silence years later, she didn't do it for fame or closure. She did it because the secret had outlived them both. It wasn't just his health he was hiding, she said quietly. It was who he was becoming. The world had called him a king, but the man Linda knew was searching for something far greater, something he couldn't find in gold records or Graceland gates. And that was the truth she'd carried for 50 years, that Elvis Presley's greatest battle wasn't against fame or addiction or loneliness. It was against the version of himself the world refused to let die. Life inside Graceland looked perfect from the outside. Fans imagined laughter echoing through the halls, music drifting from room to room, and Elvis holding court like a Southern king. But Linda Thompson knew the truth. Behind those locked gates, time didn't move forward. It circled endlessly around the same sleepless nights, the same whispered fears, the same haunting feeling that something sacred was unraveling. Elvis lived on a schedule that belonged to no one but him. Days began at sunset. Breakfast was dinner. Visitors were chosen, not welcomed. The mansion was filled with laughter one moment and silence the next, depending on which version of Elvis woke up that night. He could be playful, quoting the Bible between jokes, playing gospel records loud enough to shake the windows. But when the music stopped, his expression changed. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by something distant, something lost. Linda became both his comfort and his anchor. She memorized his moods, learned to read the signs, the sudden stare into nothing, the muttered words about destiny, the way he'd fall into prayer at 3 in the morning, as if he were pleading with someone no one else could see. Elvis wasn't just tired, he was tormented. He spoke about God constantly, not as faith, but as a burden. He believed he'd been chosen for something divine, and yet, every night he felt himself slipping further from grace. He'd tell Linda about visions, strange coincidences, moments when he felt touched by something bigger than fame. "I'm not just here to sing," he whispered once. "I'm here to remind people there's more to life than this." But that conviction didn't bring him peace. It fractured him. Every concert, every screaming crowd only deepened the divide between the man who wanted to save souls and the performer trapped under flashing lights. Linda began to see how fame didn't just isolate him, it distorted reality itself. People around him stopped saying no. Every wish was granted instantly. Every mistake was excused. And when you're told you're special long enough, you start to wonder if maybe you really are. Elvis wasn't arrogant. He was desperate to believe it meant something, that the spotlight had a purpose, that the sacrifices weren't for nothing. She saw the cracks growing in real time, the long nights without sleep, the handfuls of pills he called medicine, the way he'd stare into mirrors and say, almost jokingly, "I don't even know who this man is anymore." Linda wanted to help, but Graceland had rules. You didn't question the king. You protected the illusion, even when the illusion was killing him. So she played her part. She smiled for photographs, answered fan mail, pretended the nights were normal. But privately, she prayed for him. Sometimes he'd collapse beside her on the couch, exhausted and trembling, confessing things no one else ever heard. He spoke of reincarnation, of past lives, of a destiny that terrified him. He believed his fame was a test, and that failing it meant losing his soul. Linda never knew whether to comfort him or cry for him. The deeper she went into his world, the more she realized how lonely genius can be. Everyone wanted something from Elvis, his voice, his image, his legend. But Linda was the only one who saw what it cost. She wasn't protecting a superstar, she was protecting a man who was coming apart in slow motion. There were nights he'd sing gospel songs softly to himself, eyes closed, tears running down his face. "I used to feel God on stage," he said once. "Now I feel nothing." That line stayed with her for years because in that moment she understood the truth. He wasn't addicted to fame or music. He was addicted to meaning. And the more the world worshipped him, the more meaningless it all became. Linda wanted to believe love could save him. She cooked his meals, sat beside him during his darkest moods, and reminded him of who he used to be. But even she began to feel the pull of the illusion. Graceland was a bubble. Once you were inside, you forgot what normal felt like. Days melted together, reality blurred, and Linda, who once believed in faith and simplicity, found herself whispering the same prayers he did. half afraid that maybe he really was chosen, and that she had been chosen to protect him. But she also began to fear something else. The more she loved him, the closer she got to the truth, the one thing he didn't want her to see. The secret wasn't just about his health or his addictions. It was about the quiet transformation happening inside him. Elvis Presley, the man everyone adored, was becoming someone else entirely, someone he no longer recognized. And deep down, Linda knew it was only a matter of time before that secret consumed them both. The night he told her the truth, the house was silent. No music, no laughter, no sound but the hum of the air conditioner echoing through the walls of Graceland. Elvis sat at the edge of his bed, eyes unfocused, his hands trembling slightly. Linda had seen him tired before. She'd seen him broken. But this was different. He wasn't talking like a man anymore. He was confessing like someone who believed his time was running out. He told her there were things the world could never understand, things he couldn't say out loud because no one would believe him. He said fame wasn't a blessing, it was a curse, a test he was failing. He believed God had given him his gift to heal people, to bring light, to remind the lost that they weren't alone. But somewhere along the way, he said, he'd used the light wrong. He talked about visions, about dreams where he saw himself standing in white, speaking to crowds that vanished into mist. "I think I'm being punished," he whispered. "I think I let him down." Linda tried to calm him, to pull him back to the present, but his eyes stayed fixed on something invisible. That's when he made her promise, never to tell anyone what he'd said. "They'll think I've lost my mind," he told her. "But you know me. You've seen it. You know this is real." She nodded, because what else could she do? She loved him, and in that moment, she understood that keeping his secret wasn't just loyalty, it was mercy. After that night, everything changed between them. Elvis became gentler, almost fragile, but there was also a new edge to him, a quiet desperation. He'd spend hours reading spiritual books, talking about reincarnation, numerology, and the Bible as if they were all pieces of the same hidden map. "I've been here before," he said one night. "I can feel it. Like I'm living the same story over again, just in a different skin." Linda listened, afraid to challenge him. She didn't see madness. She saw a man drowning in his own brilliance, searching for meaning in a world that demanded he be nothing but a performer. She saw him pray for hours, asking God to forgive him for things he couldn't name. And every time he walked on stage afterward, smiling and bowing, she wondered if anyone in the crowd could see what she saw. The trembling under the surface, the exhaustion in his soul. The secret she was keeping wasn't about scandal or shame. It was about identity. Elvis Presley, the most famous man on earth, was losing himself to a belief that both terrified and comforted him. He thought he'd been chosen for something divine, but he also feared he'd failed that purpose, that his fame was proof he'd traded faith for vanity. "I can't tell what's real anymore," he told her once. "The music, the crowds, the love, it all feels like a dream I can't wake up from." Linda wanted to help him, but the deeper his spiritual confusion grew, the more isolated he became. He stopped trusting the people around him. He saw signs in everything: the color of the sky, a number on a clock, a lyric in a song. He'd whisper, "That means something," as if decoding a message only he could hear. And through it all, she stayed silent, terrified of breaking the fragile peace between them. There were moments when she thought he might be healing. They'd laugh, reminisce, share quiet dinners where he seemed almost normal again. But then, something would trigger the darkness. A dream, a song, a sudden silence. He'd look at her, his voice trembling, and say, "Promise me you'll protect it. Promise me they'll never know." And she always did, because by then, she wasn't just keeping his secret, she was living inside it. The pressure of that silence began to crush her. Friends noticed she'd grown distant, quieter. They thought it was exhaustion, but Linda was carrying the weight of two souls, hers and his. Every time she spoke to outsiders, she edited herself carefully, guarding words that could unravel his legend. She knew that if anyone ever found out what he truly believed about himself, they wouldn't see faith, they'd see madness. And that was what Elvis feared most. Not death, not loneliness, but being remembered as a man who'd lost his mind. So she stayed quiet, even as he slipped further away, even as the pills dulled his spirit and the world around him blurred. The promise she'd made became a prison, but she never broke it. Because deep down, Linda understood something no one else did. That the king of rock and roll wasn't destroyed by fame or addiction. He was destroyed by belief, by the unbearable idea that he'd been chosen by God and somehow failed him. And that was the darkest secret of all. When Elvis died, the world mourned a legend. Fans lined the streets outside Graceland, weeping as if a family member had been taken from them. But inside, behind the closed doors and drawn curtains, Linda Thompson sat in silence. She had lost something the public would never understand. They'd lost an icon. She'd lost a man who had trusted her with the most fragile part of himself, and now that secret belonged to her alone. For years, she refused interviews that wanted dirt or drama. People wanted to hear about pills, about women, about scandals. But Linda always redirected the conversation. He was a deeply spiritual man, she'd say softly. That was her line. Always gentle, always vague. Because how could she explain the truth without shattering the image millions still worshipped? How could she tell them that Elvis hadn't died as a sinner lost in excess, but as a man convinced he'd disappointed God? In private, the guilt never left her. Every time she saw his face on a poster, every time a documentary replayed his smile, she felt the weight of his final confession pressing against her chest. She'd promised him the world would never know. And for decades she kept that promise, out of love, out of fear, and maybe out of something deeper. Reverence. Years passed. The myth of Elvis grew larger, more distant. Fans turned his life into legend and his pain into poetry. But Linda couldn't join in the nostalgia. She knew what the lights had cost him. She'd seen the nights when he'd kneel on the carpet, begging for a sign that he hadn't been forgotten by God. She'd heard the words he whispered between prayers, the doubt that haunted him long before fame ever did. By the time Linda reached her 70s, she had spent more time without Elvis than with him. Yet his presence had never really left. Every anniversary, every headline, every impersonator on a Vegas stage, it was all a reminder that the man she'd loved still lived in fragments scattered across the world. But none of those fragments carried the truth. Not the one she kept locked inside. When she finally spoke about it, she did so carefully, not as a revelation, but as a release. Her voice trembled, not with drama, but with compassion. He wasn't hiding sin, she said. He was hiding pain. He was fighting himself. She explained that Elvis had believed his gift was divine, that every song, every performance was meant to heal people. But when fame turned that gift into a burden, he began to believe he'd failed his purpose. He thought he'd disappointed God, she said quietly. That was the real tragedy. He didn't die thinking he was a king. He died thinking he wasn't worthy. Her words changed everything. They didn't make him smaller. They made him human again. For the first time, fans saw beyond the glitter and the jumpsuits. They saw a man who had carried the weight of millions on his shoulders, while doubting whether he deserved any of it. Linda didn't tell the story for sympathy. She told it because she understood something that only time could teach, that love sometimes means silence, and sometimes it means truth. For 50 years, she had been the guardian of his secret, protecting the man behind the myth. But now, with age softening her voice, she finally chose to free both of them from it. She spoke of how, in his last years, Elvis had found brief moments of peace, late at night, singing gospel songs not for the stage, but for himself. That's how I want to remember him, she said. Not the headlines, not the chaos, just Elvis, sitting in the dark, singing to God like a child asking to be let back home. And maybe that was his truest legacy. Not the fame, not the fortune, but the faith that refused to die, even when everything else did. Linda's revelation didn't tarnish his memory, it completed it. The king who once seemed larger than life was finally understood as he truly was. A man who believed his soul was borrowed, and his voice was meant for something divine. A man who spent his final years not chasing applause but searching for forgiveness. And the woman who loved him, who kept his secret when the world wasn't ready to hear it, became the final witness to his humanity. Because sometimes, the most sacred truth isn't the one that makes a man famous. It's the one that reminds the world he was human all along. Some stories aren't about what was lost, but what was finally understood. If this truth about Elvis moved you, explore the next chapter. At 85, Elvis's former bodyguard finally speaks out. He wasn't the man you think. Subscribe now and keep discovering the hidden hearts behind the legends we thought we knew.